So today we're doing something very different as requested by one of you. We're going to go over drink zones, all the zones in the game, drink zones, eat zones, and rest zones, how they work, why they're important. And aside from like just the core fundamentals as far as, aim gun, pull trigger, pew pew, things die, the zones are probably the most important thing for you to understand to be able to get animals. So I am out on Medved right now, but it's the exact same on every single map. Every animal's drink time, every animal's sleep time, eat time, everything is exactly the same. But what you can do is you can head over to, there is a guide on Steam called Kosa's Guide. You can also just Google it, or you can download the Call of the Wild companion app, which is where you can view all of the animals' drink zones and their rare fur varieties and everything like that. What scores diamond? There's a bunch of information on there. You can look up their exact drink zones, or you can just go out on your map and start exploring. And if you hover your mouse over it or your cursor, whatever system it is that you're playing on, you can see in the bottom right of the screen it says Moose 12 to 1600. So that's saying that moose drink from 1200 to 1600, and that's across every single map. If I go to this rest zone here, it says wild boar from 1400 to 1700. So at that time of day, there should be animals there. Now that time also includes their travel time, which is where it gets a little bit confusing. So typically, like if I'm doing a moose grind, moose drink time is 1200 to 1600, but I'll usually set it to like 1300 or 1330 because it includes the time that it takes those moose to walk from wherever their feed zone is on the map to that drink zone. So they'll always be a little bit late because there is travel time to each zone, but they'll always leave pretty much on time, if not a little bit late from their zones as well. So the way that you can do a grind is if, say, I fast travel to this tent here. So we fast travel to the tent. Currently, I can look at my phone. It's 1804, so that's not a good drink time. So I'm just going to set it to what I'm familiar with on this map, which is grinding moose for the great one, right? And moose drink time is from 1200 to 1600, so I'm going to set it to like 1315 is what we'll go with. We'll rest. It will cost you money every single time that you rest. The longer that time passes in game, that cost will be reduced. And in theory, there you go. There's our moose. And so what you would do is you would set up your tents. 250 is the magic number away. I usually go a little bit further from your zone. So you would place a marker on the zone, and then if you place a tent there, you can fast travel to it without spooking the animals. If you're closer than 250 meters to the animal when you fast travel, it'll spook the entire zone. Also, if you're close enough, the animals just won't even spawn. So you want to make sure to be that 250 yards away or so. The other thing to know about zones is that for grinding animals, drink zones are always the easiest. At least in my opinion, they are always the easiest. The reason for that is typically they're going to be on lakes where there's not a lot of tree cover, there's not brush cover, you're not having to like army crawl through a forest in hopes of seeing something at that zone. Instead, you can just count on being able to see that entire group of animals at the lake. And let's do a quick example of that here. We're going to fast travel to this one. And as we load in and my mouse goes crazy, as you can see, we have a very long line of sight. Now, there's no male at that moose drink zone, but there's a drink zone here. There's another one over to the right, which doesn't look like that one's made its way there. Moose are, from what I've seen, the notoriously late species. But you can see how this is easier than trying to sneak up on animals that are resting or feeding. Because as I'm running down my moose zones here, I can just set it to auto run. I don't have to have my hands on anything. And I can just put a marker down here at my next zone, since this one just has a female, right? And as I'm running down, I can, see what we have. We have level 2 here. And on another screen, on my phone, whatever, I can watch Netflix. I can watch YouTube. I'm not having to spend hours and hours of time just army crawling through the forest, and then you get there and inevitably you've either spooked the animal or something like that. The exclusions to the drink zones, animals that don't have them, are pretty limited. Off the top of my head, I don't believe turkeys have a drink zone, as well as most hares and rabbits don't have drink zones. but typically they are a little bit easier to hunt in general. Now, rabbits and hares, that can certainly be difficult in its own right, but that's a totally different animal. Literally. The last thing to know about zones, if I come up here, is hunting pressure, which are these purple circles. And what happens is when you shoot an animal and it dies, specifically only when it dies, it will create one circle of hunting pressure. So this zone here that I'm circling, that is from one animal, where this one to the right is from two. You can see it's brighter pink. And what's important about hunting pressure is if I killed another moose right here and there was 4 overlapping hunting pressure zones, it deletes any zones inside of it. So if you're doing a grind or something like that, you want to avoid deleting your zones generally, because what will happen is they'll respawn somewhere else on your map, and now you're stuck re-exploring your whole map looking for those zones, because those respawns could be your great one. They could be the next rare. They could be a diamond. They could just be another kill that you need to go get, right? So you want to be careful about that. When you get to a zone that there are animals there that you want to take, consider which ones you want to take. If there are bigger ones, I usually go for the biggest and then work my way down. But in general, just be careful about that, especially when you're on your grind. As you start going around, you can see that our hunting pressure is really spread out. And hunting pressure, I forget how many zones of hunting pressure can be on your map at one time, but it'll slowly fade. There can only be so many of these zones. So let's show how hunting pressure works right now. We have an aggressive female moose coming at us right here. Well, that was a rough one. Okay, so right here, she died, and this zone appeared. This hunting pressure zone appeared. And one of mine on the map has disappeared. I don't really know which one it was. It's very hard to tell, but what you'll notice as you do a grind is on my map, I usually work my way down here and then come around. And what you'll see is when you first start your grind, it'll be a like snaky worm thing that'll follow you around the whole map, and it'll slowly just disappear behind you. And as you go through, you'll just get into motion, and then eventually you'll get to a point where there are certain zones that you want to hit, and that's what you're seeing here. Is I knew I wanted to grind this zone, this one, and it just comes down to your respawns will be, if you're doing herd management, your respawns will be low levels of the trophy animal type, or they'll randomly turn to all female zones, or they're just not getting good respawns. Whatever it is, just experiment with things. A lot of the Great One grinds are not set in stone, so keep that in mind. That's pretty much how zones work. There are these 3 types right here again, and the biggest thing to pay attention to with zones is just that hunting pressure, because deleting zones is a pain. Sometimes the only time I'll really delete zones is, say I have a small lake like this, and there's like 3 drink zones on it. Well, I don't want that, because this zone might have 4 moose, this one might have 5, and this one might have 3, and then I can only get like 1 or 2 moose every time I come here. And so I'll probably delete those zones, and then you'd have to go explore your map. Additionally, if you have a zone that is all female and you're doing a grind, you can completely ignore that zone. Hunting the females isn't going to negatively affect your grind, but they'll never respawn as a male, meaning that they'll never respawn as a great one, right? So to save time, you really just want to kind of avoid the females. Trust me, it's going to take a lot of time to get a great one, and moving your tents around, experimenting with where to place them, where you like having them, that is going to be time much better well spent than hunting females. If you have any other questions about zones, how they work, feel free to drop it in the comments. I try and respond to every single comment that we get. Thank you so much for the suggestion for this video, and thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.